What can make an entire town change its heart about a man they once saw as an outsider? In the dusty plains of Texas, where prejudice runs as deep as the roots of ancient oaks, one moment of courage would challenge everything a community believed about honor, heroism, and the true meaning of belonging. Tell us in the comments from which country you're watching us. My name is Dakota Williams, though most folks in these parts have called me worse things than that. Half Comanche, half white, and fully unwelcome in both worlds. That's been my reality for 32 years. I've lived alone in the mountains above Clearwater, Texas, for the past 5 years, ever since the last time I tried to make a life among civilized people. The morning of September 15th, 1883, started like any other. I was checking my traps along Eagle Creek when I saw the smoke. At first, I thought it was just someone burning brush, but as the black column grew thicker and wider, spreading across the valley like a disease, I knew something was terribly wrong. I mounted my horse, Storm, and rode hard toward the ridge that overlooked Clearwater. What I saw made my blood freeze. The entire eastern side of town was ablaze. The dry summer had turned the wooden buildings into kindling, and the wind was pushing the flames straight toward the heart of the settlement. For a moment I hesitated. These were the same people who had driven me out 5 years ago, who had made it clear that a half-breed wasn't welcome in their community. The same people who had refused to let me buy supplies in their stores, who had crossed the street to avoid me, who had whispered "savage" when they thought I couldn't hear. But then I saw her, a little girl in a blue dress, no more than 8 years old, standing on the roof of the schoolhouse, surrounded by flames. She was crying, calling for her mama, and I could see that the ladder she had climbed was already burning. I didn't think, I just acted. I rode Storm hard down the mountain, through the smoke and chaos, straight into the heart of the fire. The heat was overwhelming, like opening the door to hell itself. The air burned my lungs, and ash fell like snow around us. "Easy, boy," I whispered to Storm as we approached the schoolhouse. The horse was terrified, but he trusted me, just as I trusted him. Just a little further. The ladder was completely engulfed now, and the little girl was trapped. I could see people below, shouting and pointing, but no one could reach her. The fire was spreading too fast, and the smoke was getting thicker. I pulled my rope from my saddle and looked for something to anchor it to. The church bell tower was still standing, about 30 feet away. It was a difficult shot, but it was the only chance. I swung the lasso 3 times and let it fly. It caught the bell tower on the first try, a small miracle. I tied the other end to my saddle horn and looked up at the girl. "Little one." I called out in English, then repeated it in Comanche. "I'm going to help you." She looked down at me with wide, terrified eyes. I could see the fear in her face, not just of the fire, but of me. Even in her terror, she had been taught to be afraid of someone who looked like me. "It's okay," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "I'm going to get you down." I guided Storm closer to the building and climbed onto the rope. Hand over hand, I pulled myself up, the hemp burning my palms, the smoke stinging my eyes. The roof was starting to collapse, and I could hear the flames roaring below us. "What's your name?" I asked when I reached her. "Emma," she whispered. "Emma Harrison." Harrison, the mayor's daughter. Of all the children in Clearwater, I was risking my life to save the daughter of the man who had personally ordered me out of town. "Well, Emma Harrison," I said, wrapping my arms around her small body, "we're going to take a little ride." I secured her to my chest with a strip of leather from my vest and began the descent. The rope swayed in the wind, and I could feel the heat intensifying below us. We were running out of time. "Close your eyes," I told her, "and hold on tight." We slid down the rope just as the schoolhouse roof collapsed in a shower of sparks and burning timber. Storm was waiting for us, and I lifted Emma onto his back before mounting behind her. "Where's your mama?" I asked. "At the church," she sobbed. "She was helping with the women's meeting." I rode toward the church, weaving between burning buildings and panicked townspeople. The smoke was so thick now that I was navigating by instinct and memory. But Storm knew these streets as well as I did, and he carried us true. The church was threatened but not yet burning. I could see a group of women huddled in the cemetery, safely away from the flames. I rode directly to them and slid Emma down into the waiting arms of a woman who had to be her mother. "Emma!" the woman cried, clutching her daughter to her breast. "Oh, my baby!" She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving her." I touched the brim of my hat and turned Storm away, but she called out, "Wait, what's your name?" "Dakota Williams," I replied. "I'll never forget this," she said. "Never." But I was already moving away because the fire was still spreading, and there were other people who needed help. For the next 6 hours, I rode through the flames of Clearwater, pulling people from burning buildings, leading families to safety, and using my knowledge of the land to guide evacuation efforts. I saved the blacksmith's family from their workshop, helped evacuate the elderly from the boarding house, and rescued 2 children who had been trapped in the general store. My clothes were singed, my hands burned, and my lungs felt like they were full of ash, but I couldn't stop. These people needed help, and despite everything that had happened between us, I couldn't turn my back on them. As the sun began to set, the fire finally began to die down. The wind had shifted, and the volunteer fire brigade from the neighboring town had arrived to help. The immediate danger was over, but the damage was devastating. Half of Clearwater was gone. Homes, businesses, memories, all reduced to ash and charred timber. But miraculously, no one had died. Everyone had made it out alive, though some just barely. I was sitting on Storm at the edge of town, watching the last of the flames flicker out, when Sheriff Jake Morrison approached me. Morrison was a fair man, better than most, but he had his orders like everyone else. "Dakota," he said, removing his hat, "I need to talk to you." I braced myself. Even after what I had done, even after saving lives, I expected him to tell me to leave. That's how it had always been. "What you did today," Morrison continued, it was extraordinary. You saved a lot of lives." "I did what anyone would have done," I replied. "No," he said firmly, "you did what a hero would have done, and I want you to know that I'm grateful. We all are." He paused, as if struggling with his words. "I know things haven't been easy for you in this town. I know people have treated you unfairly, but what you did today, it changes things." "Does it?" I asked, not daring to hope. "The mayor wants to see you," Morrison said. "Tomorrow morning at the town square, 10 o'clock. My heart sank. Samuel Harrison, the mayor, was the same man who had led the effort to drive me out of town 5 years ago. He was Emma's father, yes, but he was also the man who had made it clear that there was no place for someone like me in Clearwater. "What does he want?" I asked. "He didn't say," Morrison replied. "Just that it was important that the whole town would be there." After Morrison left, I rode back up to my cabin in the mountains. My hands shook as I tended to my burns and tried to wash the smoke from my lungs. I had saved his daughter, saved his town, but I knew that men like Samuel Harrison didn't change their minds easily. As I sat on my porch that night, looking down at the smoldering ruins of Clearwater, I wondered what tomorrow would bring. Would they thank me and then ask me to leave? Would they accuse me of starting the fire in the first place? Would they find some way to turn my heroism into a crime? I had learned long ago not to expect kindness from the white world. My Comanche grandfather had taught me that a man's worth was measured by his actions, not his blood. But my white father had taught me that blood was all that mattered to most people. Tomorrow, I would find out which lesson was true. I stayed awake most of the night, watching the stars and thinking about Emma Harrison's frightened face, about her mother's grateful tears, about the lives I had saved and the town I had helped preserve. I had spent 5 years in isolation, convincing myself that I was better off alone, that I didn't need the acceptance of people who would never truly accept me. But as I prepared for sleep, I realized that something had changed in me during those 6 hours of fighting the fire. I had remembered what it felt like to be part of something bigger than myself, to use my skills and courage not for my own survival, but for the protection of others. Whatever tomorrow brought, I would face it with the same courage I had shown in the flames. Because regardless of what the town of Clearwater decided about me, I had proven something to myself, that I was worthy of respect, that my actions mattered, and that heroism knows no color or blood. The question was, would they see it the same way? Chapter 2. I woke before dawn, as I had every morning for the past 5 years, but this morning was different. Instead of the usual routine of checking traps and tending to my small garden, I found myself staring at my reflection in the cracked mirror above my wash basin. The man looking back at me bore the marks of yesterday's battle. My dark hair was singed at the ends, my hands were wrapped in strips of cloth to cover the rope burns, and my face was streaked with ash that no amount of washing seemed to remove completely. But it was my eyes that held my attention. They looked different somehow, more alive than they had in years. I dressed carefully, choosing my best shirt and the leather vest my Comanche grandfather had made for me before he died. If I was going to face the judgment of Clearwater, I would do it with dignity. The ride down to town took 30 minutes, and with each step Storm took, my anxiety grew. What did Mayor Harrison want? What did it mean that the whole town would be there? In my experience, when angry white men gathered in groups, it rarely ended well for people like me. As I approached the outskirts of Clearwater, the devastation from yesterday's fire became clear. Entire blocks had been reduced to blackened foundations and twisted metal. The smell of ash and smoke still hung heavy in the air, and people moved through the ruins like ghosts, salvaging what they could from their destroyed lives. But what struck me most was how people looked at me as I rode past. Instead of the usual hostile stares or deliberate ignoring, I saw something I had never seen before: recognition. Some nodded respectfully, others tipped their hats, and a few even smiled. It was unsettling and hopeful at the same time. I dismounted at the edge of the town square and tied Storm to a hitching post. The square was already filling with people, more people than I had ever seen gathered in one place in Clearwater. Men, women, children, all standing in clusters, talking in hushed tones. When they saw me, the conversation stopped, and I felt every eye in the crowd turn toward me. Dakota Williams. I turned to see Dr. Margaret O'Brien approaching. She was a small woman with red hair and intelligent green eyes, the only doctor in town, and from what I had heard, the only woman who had ever defied the town council on anything. "Doctor O'Brien," I replied, touching the brim of my hat. "I heard what you did yesterday," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "I treated 3 of the people you saved. Without your actions, they would have died." "I'm glad they're all right," I said. "More than all right," she continued. "You gave them their lives back, all of us." She paused, studying my face. "Those burns on your hands, have you treated them properly?" "They're fine," I said, though they still throbbed constantly. "They're not fine," she said firmly. "After this meeting, you come to my office. Those need proper care, or they'll get infected." It was the first time in 5 years that someone from town had offered to help me with anything. I didn't know how to respond. "Dr. O'Brien," I said carefully, "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure how people would feel about me being in your office." "People can feel however they want," she said with a defiant lift of her chin. "I'm a doctor and you're injured. That's all that matters." Before I could respond, a commotion near the church caught my attention. Mayor Samuel Harrison was walking toward the square, flanked by Sheriff Morrison and Reverend Thomas Mitchell. Behind them came a group of the town's most prominent citizens: the bank president, the store owners, the leading ranchers. My mouth went dry. This looked like a tribunal, not a thank you ceremony. "Dakota Williams," Mayor Harrison called out as he approached. "Thank you for coming." Harrison was a tall man with graying hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. 5 years ago, he had looked at me with undisguised disgust when he ordered me out of town. Now, His expression was unreadable. "Mayor Harrison," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I believe you know most of these gentlemen," he said, gesturing to the men behind him. "And I think you know why we're here." I didn't, actually, but I remained silent. "Before we begin," Harrison continued, "I want to make sure everyone understands what happened yesterday. This man," he pointed at me, "this man saved my daughter's life. He rode into a fire that would have killed most men, climbed a burning building, and carried Emma to safety." A murmur went through the crowd. I could see some people nodding, others looking uncomfortable. "But that's not all he did," Harrison continued. "For 6 hours, while the rest of us were running around like chickens with our heads cut off, Dakota Williams organized rescue efforts. He saved the Peterson family from their burning house. He helped evacuate the boarding house. He guided people to safety when the smoke was so thick we couldn't see our hands in front of our faces." The murmur grew louder. I could see people in the crowd turning to look at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. "Some of you are wondering why I'm telling you this," Harrison said, his voice growing stronger. "Some of you are thinking that what he did was just common decency, that anyone would have done the same thing." He paused, looking around the crowd. "But that's not true, is it? Because 5 years ago, when this man tried to make a life in our town, we drove him out. We told him he wasn't welcome. We made it clear that we didn't want his kind here." The square had gone completely silent. Even the children had stopped playing. Yesterday, when our town was burning, when our families were in danger, this man could have ridden away. He could have said, "Let them burn. They never wanted me anyway." He could have taken his revenge on us by doing nothing. Harrison's voice broke slightly, but he didn't. He risked his life over and over again to save people who had rejected him. He showed us what real courage looks like, what real Christian charity looks like. I could see tears in the eyes of some of the women in the crowd. Even some of the men were struggling to maintain their composure. "I've been mayor of this town for 10 years, Harrison continued. "I've been proud of our community, proud of our values. But yesterday, I learned something about myself that I don't like. I learned that I'm capable of judging a man by his blood instead of his character." He turned to face me directly. "Dakota Williams, I owe you an apology. This town owes you an apology. We judged you unfairly and we were wrong." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. "But an apology isn't enough," Harrison said. "Words are cheap, actions matter, and that's why we're here today." He gestured to Reverend Mitchell, who stepped forward carrying a wooden box. "This is why we asked you to come," Harrison said. "This is why the whole town is here, because we want to make things right." My throat felt tight. "Mayor Harrison, I appreciate what you're saying, but I don't need anything from you. I don't need your thanks or your—" "Yes, you do," interrupted a voice from the crowd. It was Mrs. Peterson, whose family I had saved from their burning house. "You do need our thanks. You need to know that we're grateful. You need to know that you're welcome here." "More than welcome," said another voice. It was Tom Bradley, the blacksmith. "You're a hero." "A hero," agreed Dr. O'Brien, "and heroes should be honored." The crowd began to murmur agreement. I could see people nodding, smiling, some even clapping. "We know we can't undo the past," Harrison said. "We can't take back the things we said or the way we treated you, but we can try to make the future different." He opened the wooden box and pulled out something that made my breath catch in my throat. It was a badge, a sheriff's badge, gleaming silver in the morning sunlight. "Jake Morrison is retiring," Harrison announced. "He's served this town faithfully for 15 years, but he wants to spend more time with his grandchildren. We need a new sheriff, and we can't think of anyone better qualified than you." The crowd erupted in applause. I stood there, stunned, unable to process what I was hearing. "The position comes with a house, a salary, and the respect of this community," Harrison continued. "If you'll have us, we'd like you to stay. We'd like you to be part of Clearwater." I looked around the square at the faces of people who had once crossed the street to avoid me. I saw genuine emotion, genuine regret, and what looked like genuine hope. "I don't know what to say," I managed. "Say yes," called out a small voice from the crowd. It was Emma Harrison, the little girl I had saved. She was holding her mother's hand, but she was looking directly at me with those same wide eyes, no longer filled with fear, but with trust. "Say yes," echoed her mother. "Please." The word stuck in my throat. For 32 years, I had been rejected by both worlds I belonged to. I had convinced myself that I was better off alone, that I didn't need the acceptance of people who would never understand me. But looking at these faces, seeing the genuine remorse and hope in their eyes, I realized that maybe I had been wrong. Maybe people could change. Maybe second chances were possible. "I need time to think," I said finally. "Of course," Harrison said. "Take all the time you need, but I hope you'll consider it. This town needs you, Dakota. We need your courage, your integrity, your heart." As the crowd began to disperse, people approached me one by one. They shook my hand, thanked me, and several invited me to dinner at their homes. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Dr. O'Brien was the last to approach. "That offer still stands," she said, "about treating your hands." "Thank you," I said. "I think I'd like that." As I walked with her toward her office, she said quietly, "You know, I've been hoping for years that someone would come along and shake this town up, force us to confront our prejudices." "I never wanted to shake anything up," I replied. "I just wanted to belong somewhere." "Well," she said with a smile, "maybe you finally do." That evening I sat on my porch again, but this time I wasn't looking down at the town with bitterness or resignation. I was looking down at people who had offered me something I had never expected, a place to belong. The question was, did I have the courage to accept it? Drevelsum. Chapter 3. 3 days passed before I made my decision. 3 days of riding through the mountains, thinking about the past and the future, weighing the risks and rewards of accepting the town's offer. On the morning of the 4th day, I rode back down to Clearwater with my answer. The town was already bustling with rebuilding efforts. People were clearing debris, sorting through salvaged goods, and making plans for reconstruction. When they saw me approaching, work stopped and people gathered around. "Well?" asked Mayor Harrison, who seemed to have been waiting for me. "I'll do it," I said simply. "I'll be your sheriff." The cheer that went up from the crowd was unlike anything I had ever experienced. People clapped, whistled, and several men came forward to shake my hand. Children ran around excitedly, and I even saw a few women wiping away tears. "Welcome home, Sheriff Williams," Harrison said, pinning the badge to my vest. "Welcome home." The word home hit me like a physical blow. For 32 years, I had been searching for a place to belong, a place where I could be accepted for who I was, rather than judged for what I looked like. I had never expected to find it in the town that had once rejected me. Sheriff Morrison stepped forward and handed me a set of keys. "These are for the jail and the office," he said. "And this," he handed me another key, "is for the house on Elm Street. It's not much, but it's yours now." "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Don't thank me yet," Morrison said with a grin. "Wait until you see the paperwork that comes with the job." Over the following weeks, I settled into my new role as sheriff. It wasn't easy. There were still some people who harbored resentment, still some who whispered about the half-breed lawman when they thought I couldn't hear. But for every person who remained hostile, there were 10 who welcomed me with open arms. Dr. O'Brien became a regular visitor, ostensibly to check on my healing hands, but really I suspected to offer friendship and support. She was a remarkable woman, intelligent, independent, and completely unafraid to speak her mind. "You know," she said one evening as we sat on the porch of my new house, "I've been thinking about what you said the other day, about wanting to belong somewhere." "What about it?" "I think maybe belonging isn't something you find," she said thoughtfully. "I think it's something you create. You didn't just find a place here, you created one. Through your actions, your courage, your willingness to forgive. The forgiveness part is still a work in progress," I admitted. "For all of us," she said. But that's what makes it meaningful. If it were easy, it wouldn't be worth anything. 2 months after the fire, the town organized a harvest festival, the first celebration since the disaster. Mayor Harrison asked me to speak at the opening ceremony, and I agreed, though the prospect terrified me. Standing on the platform in the town square, looking out at the faces of people who had once rejected me and now called me friend, I struggled to find the right words. "When I was a boy," I began, "my Comanche grandfather told me that a man's worth isn't measured by his blood or his possessions, but by his willingness to help others when they need it most. My white father taught me that the world can be cruel to those who are different, but that cruelty doesn't have to define us." I paused, looking for Emma Harrison in the crowd. She was sitting on her father's shoulders, smiling at me with trust and affection. 2 months ago, I thought I knew what this town was. I thought I knew what these people were. I was wrong. I judged you as harshly as you had judged me. But the fire changed us all. It showed us what we could be when we put aside our differences and worked together. The crowd was completely silent, hanging on every word. "I want to thank you for giving me a second chance," I continued, "for showing me that people can change, that communities can heal, that belonging is possible even for those who have been outsiders all their lives." I took a deep breath. "But most of all, I want to thank you for teaching me that home isn't a place you're born into. It's a place you choose, and that chooses you back." The applause was thunderous. People were crying, laughing, hugging each other. Emma Harrison climbed down from her father's shoulders and ran to the platform, throwing her small arms around my legs. "I'm glad you stayed," she whispered. "I'm glad you're our sheriff." "I'm glad too, little one," I said, lifting her up. "I'm glad too." As the festival continued around us, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me here. The years of rejection, the isolation, the pain of never belonging anywhere. All of it had led to this moment, to this place, to these people who had become my family. Dr. O'Brien appeared at my elbow, looking up at me with those intelligent green eyes. "So," she said, "what do you think? Was it worth it?" I looked around at the celebration, at the rebuilt town, at the faces of people who had once been strangers and were now friends. I thought about the little girl in my arms, about the badge on my chest, about the keys in my pocket to a house I could call home. "Yes," I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. It was worth it. 6 months later, I stood in the same town square, but this time I was wearing my best suit and holding Dr. Margaret O'Brien's hand. Reverend Mitchell was performing our wedding ceremony, and the entire town had turned out to celebrate. "Do you, Dakota Williams, take Margaret O'Brien to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," I said, looking into the eyes of the woman who had stood by me from the beginning. "And do you, Margaret O'Brien, take Dakota Williams to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Then, by the power vested in me by God and the state of Texas, I pronounce you husband and wife." The kiss we shared was witnessed by the entire town of Clearwater, a town that had once rejected me and now celebrated my happiness as their own. As we walked back down the aisle hand in hand, I saw Emma Harrison in the crowd. She was older now, nearly 9, and she had grown into a confident, intelligent young lady. When she saw me looking, she smiled and waved. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. "Thank you," I mouthed back, because she was right. We had saved each other that day in the fire. She had given me the chance to prove my courage, and I had given her the chance to see past the color of my skin to the content of my character. That night, as Maggie and I sat on our porch watching the stars, she asked me if I ever regretted leaving my mountain cabin. "Never," I said without hesitation. "That cabin was where I survived. This is where I live. And the difference is?" "The difference," I said, pulling her closer, "is that survival is about protecting yourself. Living is about protecting others. Survival is about enduring. Living is about belonging. And you belong here now?" "I belong here now," I confirmed. "With you, with this town, with these people. I belong." As if to prove my point, a voice called out from the darkness. "Evening, Sheriff Williams. Evening, Mrs. Williams." It was Tom Bradley, the blacksmith, heading home from the saloon. Just a normal greeting between neighbors, but it meant everything to me. "Evening, Tom," I called back. "Beautiful night," he said. "Yes," I agreed, looking up at the stars that had watched over my journey from outcast to lawman, from loner to husband, from survivor to someone who truly lived. "It's a beautiful night." The fire had taken half of Clearwater's buildings, but it had given the town something far more valuable, the chance to rebuild not just their homes, but their hearts. They had learned that heroism comes in all colors, that courage knows no bloodline, and that sometimes the person you least expect can be the one who saves you. And I had learned that belonging isn't about where you come from or what you look like. It's about what you're willing to do for others, what you're willing to sacrifice for the greater good, and what you're willing to forgive for the sake of peace. The Comanche warrior who had saved a town from fire had found something more valuable than gold or glory. He had found a home, a family, and a future worth fighting for. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from conquering your enemies, but from allowing them to become your friends. What did you think of this incredible story of redemption and belonging? Did the ending surprise you? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring Western stories that will touch your heart.